The year was 1857. The place was Milledgeville, the humid, fever-haunted capital of Georgia. The official record, logged in the steady hand of the Baldwin County clerk, is a simple and final thing. It states that Clara Whitfield, aged 12 years, daughter of Henry and Martha Whitfield, died on the 14th day of September from a sudden and violent fever. This fact was witnessed, documented, and accepted. It was the earth that would later refuse to accept it. Before the fever, the Whitfields were a portrait of quiet prosperity. Henry Whitfield was a cotton merchant of some standing, a man known for his sober demeanor and fair dealings. His wife, Martha, was a devout woman whose life revolved around her home, her church, and her only child. Clara was, by all accounts, a bright and gentle girl, with hair the color of corn silk and a disposition that charmed the neighbors on Oak Street. She was the center of her parents' world, a single, precious light in their lives. The trouble began on Saturday, September 12th. The day had been oppressive, the air thick and still, hanging over the town like a wet shroud. Sickness was a constant companion in the summers of antebellum Georgia, a grim lottery of dysentery, yellow fever, and unnamed agues that came and went with the seasons. When Clara first complained of a headache and a deep chill, there was concern, but not yet alarm. A surviving fragment of a letter from Martha Whitfield's sister, Eliza, who lived in Savannah, offers a glimpse into those first few hours. The letter is dated much later, in October of that year, and its tone is one of bewildered grief. An excerpt from the letter of Eliza May Croft reads, "Martha wrote to me on the Monday following, a frantic, blotted letter that I could barely read for the tear stains. She said the illness began so simply. Clara was helping her put up peaches that Saturday morning. By midday, she said the heat was too much for her, that her head felt full of cotton. Martha put her to bed with a cool cloth, thinking it was just the sun. She said she never imagined, not for a moment, that it was the beginning of the end. She blamed herself for that, for not seeing the shadow as it fell. By evening, Clara's condition had worsened dramatically. The chills gave way to a raging fever that left her skin hot to the touch. She began to speak nonsense, her eyes wide and unfocused, staring at things in the corners of her room that no one else could see. It was then that Henry Whitfield sent a boy to fetch Dr. Amos Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher was a man of science and reputation in Milledgeville. Educated in Philadelphia, he was considered the most capable physician in the county. His personal medical journal from that year survives, held in the state archives. The leather binding is cracked, and the pages are yellowed, but his handwriting remains precise and clinical, a stark contrast to the terror unfolding within the Whitfield home. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated September 13th, 1857. Called to the Whitfield residence late last night. Patient is Clara Whitfield, female, age 12. Presented with a fever of extreme severity, approximately 104 degrees by my estimation. Delirium is pronounced. Patient speaks of a cold man standing by her window. Responds to no questions. Skin is flushed. Pulse is rapid and thin. Administered a tincture of laudanum to calm her agitation and a quinine powder, though I suspect this is not a malarial fever. The onset was too swift, too violent. Prognosis is guarded. The mother is distraught. The father maintains a grim composure. Have seen fevers like this before. They rarely end well. For 2 days, the house on Oak Street became a fortress of quiet desperation. Dr. Fletcher came and went, his methods yielding no results. He tried cold compresses, then blistering plasters, the common and often brutal treatments of the era. Nothing broke the fever's grip. Clara drifted further away, her moments of lucidity growing shorter and less frequent. Neighbors brought food that went uneaten and offered prayers that seemed to go unanswered. The humid air of the house grew heavy with the scent of sickness and fear. Martha Whitfield's personal diary, a small, cloth-bound book, documents the ordeal from a mother's perspective. The entries for those days are nearly illegible. The script, a frantic scrawl of looping letters and dark ink blots. From the diary of Martha Whitfield, September 13th, 1857. She did not know me today. My own child looked through me as if I were glass. Her fever burns and burns. Amos can do nothing. He looks at me with such pity in his eyes. I cannot bear it. She whispers about the red clay, about how cold it is under the ground. O Lord, do not take her from me. Do not take my only light. Henry sits by her bed, holding her hand, but it is like holding the hand of a stranger. She is already so far away. The end came on the afternoon of Monday, September 14th. The fever broke, but not in the way they had prayed for. Clara's temperature plummeted. Her skin, once fiery hot, became cool and clammy. A blue tint crept into her lips and the beds of her fingernails. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, became slow, punctuated by long, terrifying pauses. Dr. Fletcher was present for the final moments. His journal entry for that day is brief, a testament to the grim finality of his profession. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated September 14, 1857. Patient expired at approximately 2 o'clock this afternoon. Respiration ceased, followed by cessation of the heart. No pulse could be detected, pupils fixed and dilated. The body's temperature fell rapidly post-mortem. Pronounced death in the presence of both parents and the household staff. Cause of death: febrile seizure, secondary to an unidentified infectious agent. A tragic loss. The family is inconsolable. Witness accounts confirm the doctor's assessment. A deposition given years later by the Whitfields' housekeeper, a woman named Sarah Cobb, for an unrelated legal matter, recalled the scene with haunting clarity. From the deposition of Sarah Cobb, recorded 1866, I was in the room. I saw her last breath. It was more of a sigh, a little puff of air, and then nothing. She went still. Dr. Fletcher, he held a mirror to her lips, and there was no fog upon it. He felt for a pulse at her neck and her wrist, and shook his head. Mr. Whitfield, he let out a sound I will never forget. And Mrs. Whitfield, she just collapsed. There was no doubt. The child was gone. Her little body was cold as stone before we even began to wash her. The rituals of death moved swiftly, as was the custom in the oppressive southern heat. The local carpenter, a man named Silas Croft, was summoned to build a coffin. He worked through the afternoon, the sound of his hammer, and saw a grim punctuation to the neighborhood's silent grief. Sarah Cobb and a neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, washed Clara's body, dressed her in her finest white Sunday dress, and tied a ribbon in her pale hair. They remarked on the unnatural coldness of her skin and the rigidity that had already set into her small limbs. The burial was scheduled for just before sundown the same day. There was no time for distant relatives to travel, no time for an elaborate service. A short procession of family and neighbors walked the dusty path to Memory Hill Cemetery, the town's primary burial ground. Henry Whitfield walked with a stony face, supporting his weeping wife. Reverend Josiah Pruitt, the stern minister of the town's Presbyterian church, led the way, his Bible held tight in his hand. The service was brief. Reverend Pruitt spoke of the Lord's mysterious ways, of the innocence of a child called home to the arms of the angels. His words, meant to be a comfort, were swallowed by the vast, quiet sorrow of the onlookers. The small pine coffin was lowered into the freshly dug, red clay earth. The first shovelfuls of dirt striking the lid sent Martha Whitfield into a fresh wave of hysterics. Henry led her away as the gravediggers finished their work, mounding the earth over the grave until there was nothing left to see. That evening, the Baldwin County Parish Ledger was updated. The entry is simple, one of many that filled the pages for the year 1857. It is written in the precise, unadorned script of a clerk who had recorded hundreds of such endings. Record of deaths, Baldwin County, Georgia. Date, September 14, 1857. Name, Whitfield, Clara. Age, 12 years. Parents, Henry and Martha Whitfield. Cause, fever. Burial, Memory Hill. Cemetery. The entry was the final word. A life had been recorded, and its end had been officially noted. The Whitfield house, fell into a profound and unnatural silence, the silence of a home hollowed out by loss. For 3 days, that silence held. For 3 days, the grave in Memory Hill Cemetery remained sealed. For 3 days, the record stood as a simple, tragic, and undisputed fact. The silence of death lasted 3 days. It was broken at dawn on Thursday, September 17th, not by a cry of grief, but by a shout of alarm. The sound came from Jacob Early, the old groundskeeper of Memory Hill Cemetery. He was a man accustomed to the quiet company of the dead, but what he found that morning was a violation of the natural order. Years later, in a town meeting concerning the upkeep of the cemetery, Jacob was asked to recall the event. The secretary's minutes, though dry and official, capture the core of his testimony. From the minutes of the Milledgeville Town Council meeting of October 5, 1861, Jacob Early, groundskeeper, was called to speak on the matter of cemetery security. He referenced the Whitfield incident of '57 as a prime example of past disturbances. Mr. Early stated, "I was making my rounds, just as the sun was coming up over the trees. I saw it from a distance. The earth by the old oak was all churned up. I thought it was dogs, or worse, hogs that had gotten in. But when I got closer, I saw the hole. It was a grave, dug back up from the inside out, it looked like. The lid of the pine box was splintered, pushed aside. I looked inside. I had to. It was empty. The little white dress was there, torn and muddy. But the child was gone. The grave was empty." The news spread through Milledgeville with the speed of a fever. Jacob Early went first to Sheriff Thompson, a man of practical mind who immediately suspected the work of resurrectionists, the ghoulish grave robbers who stole bodies for medical colleges. A party was dispatched to the cemetery, and their findings confirmed the groundskeeper's story. The grave of Clara Whitfield had been desecrated, the coffin broken open, and the body stolen. Word reached the Whitfield home by mid-morning. Henry, his face a mask of cold fury, set about offering a reward for any information. He spoke of monstrous men who would prey on the grieving. Martha locked herself in her room, her sorrow renewed and twisted into a new, horrific shape. The thought of her daughter's body, her final resting place, being violated was a torment beyond endurance. The town buzzed with theories, each more unsettling than the last. But no one, not even in their most fevered imaginings, could have predicted the truth. The truth did not arrive with a sheriff's report or a paid informant. It arrived late that night, a soft, scratching sound at the back kitchen door of the Whitfield house. Sarah Cobb, the housekeeper, was the first to hear it. She later recounted the moment in a hushed and fearful tone to her sister. A portion of a letter from Sarah Cobb to her sister Mary, dated September 28, 1857. It was nearly midnight. The house was so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I heard it. A scrape, scrape, scrape against the wood. I thought it was a stray dog looking for scraps. I opened the door just a crack, ready to shoo it away. And then I saw her, standing there on the stoop, in the moonlight. It was little Clara. Her white burial dress was ripped and caked with red mud from her shoulders to her feet. Her hair was full of twigs and dirt. She was just standing there, not saying a word, looking at me with eyes that did not seem to see. I screamed. I don't think I have ever screamed like that before or since. Martha Whitfield heard the scream and came running, followed moments later by Henry. They found Sarah Cobb backed against a wall, pointing a trembling finger at the doorway. And there stood Clara. She was alive. Her chest rose and fell with shallow, even breaths. Her skin was unnaturally pale and cool to the touch, but it was the skin of a living thing, not the cold, waxy texture of a corpse. She was barefoot, her feet bruised and dirty. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply stood in the doorway, a silent, earthen creature returned from the depths. Martha let out a strangled cry, a sound of impossible joy and utter terror. She rushed forward and pulled the child into her arms, ignoring the cold mud that stained her nightgown. Henry stood frozen for a long moment, his mind struggling to accept what his eyes were seeing. He then moved with sudden purpose, pulling his daughter inside and barring the door, as if to lock the impossible reality in and the sane world out. Dr. Amos Fletcher was summoned once again. He arrived to a scene that defied all medical explanation. His journal entry from that night is significantly longer and more detailed than the one recording Clara's death. The handwriting, usually so controlled, shows signs of haste, of a mind reeling from shock. From the medical journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated September 18, 1857, received an urgent summons to the Whitfield residence after midnight. The circumstances are, to put it mildly, extraordinary. The child, Clara Whitfield, whom I pronounced deceased 3 days prior, is alive. I have examined her thoroughly. A faint pulse is present, slow but regular. Respiration is shallow, almost imperceptible unless one holds a feather to her lips. Her skin is cool, far below the normal temperature for a living child. Yet she does not shiver. Her eyes are open, but she appears unresponsive to light or movement. Her pupils are wide, like dark pools. She does not speak or react to her parents' voices. She bears the marks of her interment, soil on her person and in her hair. The family reports she was found outside their door. I am at a loss for a conventional diagnosis. The only plausible, albeit rare, explanation is a state of profound catalepsy or suspended animation, a trance so deep as to perfectly mimic death. The fever must have induced this state. The cool of the earth may have, paradoxically, preserved her life until she roused. I have explained this to the parents. It is a miracle, of a sort, a 1 in a million medical anomaly, and yet I cannot shake a deep and profound unease. I personally verified her death. I felt for a pulse that was not there. I saw the stillness in her chest. The child before me now. She is breathing, her heart is beating, but there is a vacancy to her that I cannot medically define. It is as if the person within has been hollowed out. I have advised rest and quiet. I have left a sleeping draught for the parents. I fear they shall need it more than the child. Dr. Fletcher's explanation of suspended animation spread through Milledgeville the next morning. For a time, it held the fear at bay. The story became one of a miracle. The Whitfield child had been mistakenly buried alive, and had, by the grace of God and her own resilience, clawed her way out of the grave and returned home. It was a shocking tale, a Gothic romance made real. Neighbors came to the house, not to mourn, but to marvel. They were met at the door by Henry Whitfield, who politely but firmly turned them away, stating that his daughter needed absolute rest to recover from her ordeal. Inside the house, the atmosphere was not one of miraculous joy. It was one of deepening dread. Clara remained unchanged. She sat where she was placed, for hours on end, staring at nothing. She ate only when her mother put a spoon to her lips, swallowing mechanically, without appetite. She did not speak, not a single word. Her parents cleaned the dirt from her hair and body, burning the ruined burial dress in the fireplace. They dressed her in her familiar clothes, but they seemed ill-fitting now, like costumes on a doll. Martha Whitfield's diary captures the rapid decay of hope into horror. From the Diary of Martha Whitfield, September 20th, 1857. She is home. My Clara is home. I say the words over and over, but the feeling does not come. I have my child back from the grave, and I am more afraid than I was when I thought her lost forever. Her hand in mine is cool, like a stone from a riverbed. She does not squeeze back. I brush her hair, the same beautiful blonde hair, but she does not lean into my touch. Her eyes are the worst. They are open, and they are her eyes, the same blue color. But when I look into them, there is no one there. It is like looking into the windows of an empty house. Today, I found her standing by the parlor window, looking out toward the cemetery. She stood there for 3 hours, perfectly still. She did not blink. What has happened to my daughter? What is this thing that has come back to me in her shape? The miracle of Clara Whitfield was a fragile thing, a piece of fine china that was destined to shatter. For a few days, the town of Milledgeville held it up to the light, marveling at its strangeness. Dr. Fletcher's theory of suspended animation, while difficult for the common mind to grasp, offered a shield against the deeper, darker questions. It was a scientific marvel, a testament to the mysteries of the human body, not the soul. But that shield began to crack on the first Sunday after Clara's return. The Whitfield family pew at the First Presbyterian Church was empty. Their absence was a profound statement, a void that drew every eye. It was an admission of shame, or perhaps fear. Into that void stepped Reverend Josiah Pruitt. He was a tall, gaunt man, with a voice that could command both fear and devotion. He did not believe in medical anomalies. He believed in God and the devil, in Scripture and in sin. And he saw the hand of the devil in the events on Oak Street. No full transcript of his sermon from that day, September 20th, survives. However, the Reverend was a meticulous man, and his personal sermon ledger, a thick, heavily annotated book, is preserved. The notes for that Sunday are written in a sharp, aggressive hand, the ink seeming to bite into the page. From the Sermon Ledger of Reverend Josiah Pruitt, September 20th, 1857, Scripture, Matthew 23:27, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness. The deceiver is a mimic. He cannot create, he can only corrupt. He will counterfeit a miracle to lead the flock astray. He will present a thing that looks like life, that breathes the air, that walks among you, but it is an empty vessel, a sepulchre, beautiful on the outside, but filled with the dust of the grave. The grave is a sacred seal. God has ordained the boundary between the living and the dead. Man shall not break it. When that seal is broken by unnatural means, it is not a resurrection of the righteous. It is an abomination. It is a doorway opened that should have remained shut. And what comes through that door is not a child of God. It is a puppet of the adversary, sent to test our faith, to sow fear and discord. It brings with it the chill of the earth it came from, a contagion not of the body, but of the soul. Do not be deceived by the familiar face. Look to the eyes. The soul is gone. Pray for deliverance. He never spoke the name Whitfield. He never said the word Clara. He did not have to. A cold dread settled over the congregation, a fear more potent than the initial shock of the girl's return. The Reverend had given their unease a name and a shape. He had taken a strange story and turned it into a theological horror. People left the church that morning looking over their shoulders, their gazes turning toward Oak Street not with curiosity, but with suspicion. The first tangible evidence for their fear appeared 3 days later at the Miller farm, which bordered the Whitfield property to the north. Thomas Miller was a simple farmer, a man who trusted in hard work and the turning of the seasons. On the morning of September 23rd, he found 2 of his healthiest milk cows dead in their stalls. A letter from Miller to his brother in Macon, dated the following week, describes the event. The paper is cheap and the spelling is poor, but the fear is palpable. An excerpt from the letter of Thomas Miller. They was fine the night before, gave milk same as always. This morning they was just laying there, stone dead, no marks on them, no sign of sickness, no foam at the mouth. Their eyes was wide open, like they seen something awful just before the end. Old man Hemphill, who knows more about livestock than any man in the county, he come and looked, said he never seen the like, said it was like the life was just pulled right out of them. 2 days later, my best hog went the same way. We are spooked, John. There is a bad air in this town since the Whitfield girl come back. My boy Daniel, he says he saw her the other day, standing by the fence line, just watching the cows. Not doing nothing, just watching. The wife says it is the evil eye. I am starting to believe her. Dr. Fletcher was called to the Miller farm. He was a physician for humans, not animals, but in a town this size, his opinion was sought on any matter of unexplained death. He performed a cursory examination of the dead animals, his frustration evident in his journal entry that evening. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated September 23, 1857, examined deceased livestock at the Miller property. 2 cows, No visible signs of trauma or common disease like blackleg or anthrax. The farmer claims they were healthy hours earlier. This is outside my area of expertise, but the suddenness is peculiar. Miller is a superstitious man and is already whispering about his neighbors. He mentioned seeing the Whitfield girl near his property line. This is precisely the kind of dangerous nonsense that Pruitt's sermon has encouraged. A sickness in livestock is a tragedy for a farmer, not a sign of witchcraft. I told him it was likely a poison in the water or a fast-acting blight in the feed. He did not seem convinced. The town is letting fear rot its good sense. But the fear was a fire, and the Reverend's words were the wind that fanned it. The story of the Miller cows spread, and with it, the story of Clara standing at the fence line, watching. More stories began to surface. A woman swore her bread dough refused to rise after Clara walked past her house. A man claimed his horse shied and threw a shoe on the road near the Whitfield property. These were small, explainable things, but in the growing atmosphere of dread, they became pieces of a damning narrative. Clara was a blight, a source of misfortune. The chill of the grave still clung to her, and it was leaching out into the world. Inside the house on Oak Street, Martha and Henry Whitfield were living in a private hell. They were prisoners, besieged by the growing hostility of their neighbors and haunted by the silent stranger who wore their daughter's face. Martha's diary entries from this period are a litany of small, terrifying observations. From the Diary of Martha Whitfield, September 25, 1857. Henry has forbidden me from opening the curtains. He says the way people stare is unchristian. I think he is just as afraid as I am. Clara sat in the parlor all day today, in her little chair. She had a dead moth in her hands. She must have found it on the windowsill. She just held it, stroking its dusty wings with one finger, over and over again, for hours. Her expression never changed. There was no sadness, no curiosity. It was the same vacant calm she has worn since she came back. I tried to take it from her, and for the first time, she reacted. Her hand tightened, and she looked at me. Truly looked at me. And her eyes, dear God, her eyes were so cold. There was a flicker of something in them, something ancient and hateful. I pulled my hand back as if I had been burned. She went back to stroking the dead thing. A few days later, an even more disturbing entry appears. From the Diary of Martha Whitfield, September 29, 1857. I heard her last night. It was very late. I thought I heard a sound from her room, a soft whispering. I crept to her door and listened. She was talking. It was the first time I had heard her voice, but it was not her voice. It was a low, guttural whisper, like stones grinding together, and the words were not words I knew. It was not English. It was a horrible, clicking language. I was too afraid to open the door. I just stood there, shaking, until it stopped. Then there was only silence. I am writing this by candlelight in my own room. I have locked my door. I am afraid of my own child. The final seal on the town's fear was set by the Harper family. The Harpers lived 2 houses down from the Whitfields. They had 2 young children, a boy named Samuel, aged 10, and a girl, Emily, aged 8. Their mother, a kind but overwhelmed woman, had always been fond of Clara. Against the tide of public opinion, she held on to the belief that Clara was a sick child who needed compassion, not fear. It was a belief that would have devastating consequences. On the afternoon of October 2nd, Samuel and Emily were playing in their front yard. Clara was outside, in the Whitfields' yard, for the first time since her return. Martha had been hoping the sun and fresh air might rouse something in her. Clara was not playing. She was standing by a rosebush, methodically pulling off all the petals, letting them fall to the ground. Samuel Harper, being a bold and curious boy, walked over to her. A neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the same woman who had helped prepare Clara's body for burial, witnessed the encounter from her porch. Her account was later given to Reverend Pruitt, who transcribed it in his notes. From the notes of Reverend Josiah Pruitt, dated October 3, 1857, titled Testimony of E. Vance. She saw the Harper boy approach the Whitfield girl. The girl did not look up from her task of destroying the flowers. The boy, Samuel, spoke to her, asked her if she wanted to play. The girl stopped. She turned her head and looked at him. Mrs. Vance said the look on the girl's face made her blood run cold. She said it was not the look of a child. The girl then reached out and touched the boy's cheek with her fingertips. Just for a second, the boy flinched and ran back to his own yard. The girl went back to pulling petals off the roses. That was all. A single touch. That night, Samuel Harper came down with a fever. It was a sudden and violent sickness, eerily similar to the one that had claimed Clara. He was struck with chills, then a burning heat. He became delirious, speaking of a cold girl and the smell of wet dirt. 2 days later, his sister, Emily, who had not touched Clara but had played with her brother, fell ill with the same symptoms. The town of Milledgeville held its breath. The coincidence was too stark, too terrifying to ignore. It was no longer about dead cows or bad luck. The contagion had passed to the town's children. The thing that had returned in Clara's body was not just a curse upon the Whitfields. It was a plague waiting to spread. The illness of the Harper children transformed Milledgeville's simmering unease into a palpable collective dread. The story of Samuel's brief encounter with Clara Whitfield, of her single, cold touch, became the central fact around which all other fears now orbited. It was no longer a matter of superstition or bad luck. It was a matter of contagion. Dr. Amos Fletcher found himself at the epicenter of this new crisis. He was called to the Harper home the night Samuel fell ill, and his journal from those days reads like a grim echo of his time at the Whitfield's bedside. His scientific mind searched for a rational explanation, but the parallels were too stark to ignore. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated October 3, 1857. The Harper boy presents with symptoms identical to those of the late Clara Whitfield. An intense fever, delirium, a rapid and thready pulse. He speaks of a cold girl and recoils from touch, claiming it feels like dirt is being pressed onto his skin. His mother is convinced it is a result of his interaction with the Whitfield child. I have tried to assure her that fevers are common and that children often share sicknesses. But this is not a common sickness. I have never seen an ague manifest with such speed and violence in two unrelated cases within weeks of each other. I have administered quinine and a cooling tincture, but I have little faith they will be effective. They were not before. 2 days later, his notes took on a tone of near desperation. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated October 5, 1857. The sister, Emily, has now contracted the illness. The same pattern: chills followed by a fever that does not break. The house is a furnace of sickness. The parents are beside themselves with terror. I am doing everything within my power, everything my education has taught me, but I feel as though I am throwing stones against a tidal wave. The town is watching. Every time I leave the Harper house, I see faces in the windows of the neighboring homes. They are not looking at me with hope. They are looking with accusation. They see me as the man who failed to keep the Whitfield girl in her grave, and now the grave is spreading. While Dr. Fletcher fought a losing battle with the physical ailment, Reverend Pruitt addressed what he saw as the spiritual one. He did not need to preach another sermon. His previous warning now seemed like prophecy. He began holding nightly prayer vigils at the church, not for the healing of the Harper children, but for the deliverance of the town from a lurking evil. A letter he wrote to a fellow clergyman in Augusta reveals his mindset. He saw the events unfolding as a grim but necessary trial for his flock. An excerpt from the correspondence of Reverend Josiah Pruitt, dated October 6, 1857. Brother Thomas, the trial I spoke of has now come to pass. The unnatural thing that walks in the form of the Whitfield child has shown its pestilential nature. 2 innocent souls, the children of the Harper family, are now afflicted by the grave's touch. The physician, a man of worldly science, is powerless, for he seeks to treat the vessel and not the venom within. Our town has been blind, content to call this abomination a medical curiosity. Now their eyes are being forced open. I am leading our people in prayer, steeling them for the hard road ahead. We must be resolute. An unclean thing cannot be suffered to dwell among the righteous. The Lord is testing us, to see if we have the strength to cast it out. The town did not need much encouragement. The Whitfield family was now completely ostracized. When Henry Whitfield went to the mercantile for supplies, the other customers would fall silent and move to the far side of the store. The proprietor, a man who had known Henry for 20 years, served him with his eyes downcast, counting his change with trembling hands as if the coins themselves might be tainted. A delivery boy who was sent to the Whitfield house with groceries left the box on the edge of the property, refusing to walk up to the door. The children of the town were kept indoors. The sound of laughter and play vanished from Oak Street. A profound and fearful quiet descended, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting to see what would become of the Harper children. The end for Samuel Harper came on the morning of October 7th, 5 days after he fell ill. The pattern was a horrifying mirror of Clara's own passing. The fever broke. His skin grew cool and clammy, and a bluish tint colored his lips. His breathing slowed, and then it simply stopped. The death of a child is a tragedy that shakes any community. But Samuel's death was not seen as a simple tragedy. It was seen as a murder. That afternoon, the Baldwin County Parish Ledger received a new entry, just a few lines below the entry for Clara Whitfield. Record of deaths, Baldwin County, Georgia. Date, October 7th, 1857. Name, Harper, Samuel. Age, 10 years. Parents, James and Mary Harper. Cause, fever. Burial, Memory Hill. Cemetery. The news of the boy's death was the spark that lit the fuse of the town's panic. The fear was now alloyed with grief and a burning, righteous anger. That evening, for the first time, a crowd gathered. It was not a mob, not yet. It was a collection of about 30 men, standing across the street from the Whitfield house, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a few lanterns. They did not shout. They did not throw stones. They just stood there in the deepening twilight, watching. A silent, terrifying vigil. Henry Whitfield saw them from the parlor window. He extinguished the lamps in the house, plunging his family into darkness. Martha's diary from that night is a single, terrified sentence. From the diary of Martha Whitfield, October 7th, 1857, they are outside watching us. They blame us. They blame her. Where can we go when the whole world has become our enemy? The vigil outside the house continued for 2 more nights. The crowd grew larger, their silence growing heavier, more menacing. The fate of Emily Harper was now the only thing holding their anger in check. Dr. Fletcher continued his visits, walking through the silent gauntlet of men who parted to let him pass, their eyes following him with a mixture of pity and contempt. His final journal entry on the matter is one of utter defeat, a confession of the failure of his science in the face of an undefinable horror. From the Medical Journal of Dr. Amos Fletcher, entry dated October 9th, 1857. Emily Harper expired this evening. The progression was identical. I have failed this family. I have failed this town. I have no name for this sickness. It behaves like a virulent fever, yet it seems to transmit not through the air or water, but through proximity to the Whitfield girl. It is a conclusion that my mind rebels against, that every principle of medicine decries as impossible. And yet, the evidence is before me. 2 healthy children are dead. The only common factor is their brief contact with a child who should herself be dead. I am a man of science, but I am standing at the edge of a chasm that science cannot bridge. I fear what the morning will bring. The news of Emily's death broke the town's restraint. The second entry in the parish ledger sealed the Whitfield's fate. Grief curdled into rage. Reverend Pruitt's warnings were no longer theories. They were proven fact. The thing in the Whitfield house was a walking plague. It had taken 2 of their children. How many more would it take before something was done? The silence outside the house was broken that night. It began with a single shout, a man's voice, raw with anger. "Abomination!" Then another voice yelled, "Bring out the witch!" A rock struck the side of the house, the sound like a gunshot in the night. Then another, shattering a window in the upstairs bedroom. The crowd was no longer a vigil. It was a mob, their individual fears and griefs merging into a single, unthinking entity, fueled by the sermons of their reverend and the fresh, undeniable reality of 2 small, newly dug graves. The night of October 9th was the night the fever of fear finally broke and became a fever of rage. The first stone that shattered the parlor window of the Whitfield house was a declaration. The time for whispers and fearful glances was over. The house on Oak Street was no longer just a place of private grief. It was a perceived source of a public plague, and the public had come to demand a cure. Inside the darkened home, the sound of the glass exploding inward was like the sky cracking open. Martha Whitfield let out a stifled scream. Henry, who had been standing watch by that same window, stumbled back, his face grim in the moonlight that now streamed through the jagged hole. For a long moment, there was only the sound of his wife's panicked breathing and the growing, guttural roar of the crowd outside. Then another rock hit the siding with a heavy, percussive thud. Henry moved with a purpose born of pure desperation. He went to the heavy oak sideboard in the dining room and retrieved a double-barreled shotgun, a weapon he used for hunting quail, not for defending his home against his neighbors. The metallic click as he checked the breech was unnervingly loud in the tense silence of the house. Martha's diary entry for that night is not an entry at all. It is a single, frantic line, scrawled sideways on a page already filled with the writings of a previous day. The pencil lead is broken, the words gouged into the paper. From the diary of Martha Whitfield, October 9th, 1857. They are here, they are breaking the windows. Henry has the gun. O Lord God, they have come for my little girl. He found Martha huddled in the darkest corner of the parlor, her arms wrapped around Clara. But the scene was not one of a mother protecting a terrified child. Clara was sitting perfectly straight on the floor, her hands resting in her lap. The shouting outside, the sound of breaking glass, the terror radiating from her own mother, none of it seemed to register. She was staring at a shard of glass on the floor, watching the way the moonlight caught its sharp edge. She was an island of unnatural calm in a sea of chaos. Outside, the mob had swelled. It was now close to 50 people, a mix of farmers, merchants, and laborers. Their faces, lit by a handful of torches and lanterns, were twisted into masks of anger and fear. Sheriff Brody Thompson arrived on the scene with his lone deputy, a young man named Peters, who looked pale and overwhelmed. The sheriff's official deposition, given 2 years later during an inquiry into his handling of civil disturbances, provides a stark, if self-serving, account of the scene he encountered. Deposition of Sheriff Brody Thompson, Baldwin County, August 12, 1859. I arrived at the Whitfield residence at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. A large and agitated crowd had assembled on the street. They were shouting threats and throwing stones and other debris at the house. I identified several prominent citizens among them, including Mr. Thomas Miller and Mr. James Harper, the latter being in a state of profound grief and agitation over the recent loss of his children. My attempts to disperse the crowd were met with defiance. Their temper was beyond reason. They believed the child within the house was a danger to the entire community. It was my assessment that any direct attempt to arrest the ringleaders would have resulted in a full-blown riot and likely bloodshed. The situation was volatile. The most unnerving figure in the crowd was not a participant. The sheriff noted the presence of the town's spiritual leader, standing apart from the violence, yet presiding over it like a dark shepherd. Deposition of Sheriff Brody Thompson continued. I observed Reverend Pruitt standing across the street under the large oak tree. He was not shouting or throwing stones. He was merely watching, his Bible in his hand. His presence seemed to give the mob a kind of righteous authority. When I approached him and asked for his help in calming the crowd, he simply looked at me and said, "Sometimes a sickness must be burned out, Sheriff. It is God's will, not mine." I knew then that I would get no help from the church. I was on my own. Back inside the house, another window shattered, this time in the kitchen. Martha flinched, but Clara did not move. She had picked up the shard of glass from the floor. She was turning it over and over in her small fingers, her touch delicate, precise. She showed no fear of its sharp edge. Henry stood by the front door, the shotgun held low, his knuckles white. He was a merchant, not a soldier. He was listening to the names of people he had known his entire life being called out in a chorus of hate. It was James Harper's voice that cut through the others. He had pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face a mess of tears and fury. "Whitfield!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "You have to give her up. She took my children. She took them both. You cannot keep that thing in there." The plea, full of a father's raw anguish, seemed to momentarily silence the others. It hung in the air, a direct and terrible accusation. Henry Whitfield knew he could not stay inside his house and wait for it to be burned down around them. He made a decision. He leaned the shotgun against the wall, a sign he intended no violence, and turned to his wife. "Stay here, Martha. Do not move from that spot." He unbolted the heavy front door and opened it just enough to step out onto the porch. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he was unarmed. The torchlight made his face look pale and haunted. "Please," he shouted, his voice strained. "We are a grieving family, just like you. My daughter is not a monster. She is sick. She has been through an ordeal none of us can understand." "She is a plague," Thomas Miller yelled back. "My livestock is dead. Harper's children are in the ground. It all started when she came back." Sheriff Thompson moved to stand beside Henry on the porch, placing a hand on his shoulder. It was a gesture meant to show the authority of the law, but everyone there knew it was a hollow one. "Go home, all of you," the sheriff commanded, though his voice lacked conviction. "This is not the way. Let the law handle this." "What law is there for this?" someone shouted from the darkness. "What law is there for the dead who walk?" From her vantage point across the street, Eleanor Vance watched the scene unfold. She had not joined the mob, but like many others, she had been drawn out of her home by the noise, a fearful spectator to the town's unraveling. Her letter to her cousin the following month is one of the few eyewitness accounts that captures the raw emotion of the moment. An excerpt from the letter of Eleanor Vance, dated November 5th, 1857. "It was the most terrible night I have ever witnessed. Our whole town had gone mad with fear. Mr. Whitfield stood on his porch, begging men he had known for years to see reason, and they looked at him with murder in their eyes. And poor James Harper, his face was a horror to see. He looked like a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. He told Mr. Whitfield that if he would not give the girl up, they would come in and take her. He said they would see her put back in the ground for good this time." The sheriff was trying to talk to them, but it was like trying to talk down a flood. The standoff on the porch lasted for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Sheriff Thompson, seeing no other way to prevent the mob from storming the house, pulled Henry Whitfield back inside. He knew he had to broker a peace, even if it was not a just one. The conversation that took place in the darkened hallway of the Whitfield house is lost to history, but its outcome is not. A few minutes later, the sheriff stepped back out onto the porch alone. "The Whitfield family will leave Milledgeville," he announced, his voice ringing with grim authority. "They will be gone by sunrise. They will take their troubles with them. Now, for the love of God, go back to your homes." It was not justice, but it was a resolution. It was an expulsion. The mob had gotten what it wanted. The source of the contagion would be removed. Grumbling, but satisfied, the crowd began to slowly disperse. James Harper was the last to leave, standing for a long time just staring at the house, a solitary figure of unresolved grief. The rest of the night passed in a flurry of desperate, silent activity. Henry hitched their sturdiest horse to a small, covered wagon. Martha moved through the house like a ghost, packing a few trunks with clothes and valuables, her movements mechanical, her face utterly blank. Sarah Cobb, the housekeeper, had long since fled, leaving them to face their exile alone. They packed what they could, leaving behind a lifetime of furniture, heirlooms, and memories. The house on Oak Street, once a symbol of their prosperity, was now just a shell they had to escape. The last thing they did was fetch Clara. She was still in the parlor, still sitting on the floor. The shard of glass was gone. She came with them without protest, a small, silent figure in the dark. She did not seem to understand that she was leaving her home forever. Eleanor Vance, still watching from her window, saw them leave just before the first hint of dawn. Her letter provides the final, chilling image of the Whitfield family's departure from Milledgeville. An excerpt from the letter of Eleanor Vance, dated November 5th, 1857. The wagon rolled away without a sound. Henry held the reins, staring straight ahead. Martha was beside him, a shawl pulled over her head. They put the child in the back, among the trunks. Just as the wagon passed under the street lamp, the girl, Clara, turned her head. She looked right at my window. I swear she looked right at me. There was no expression on her face, none at all. It was like looking at a painted doll. Then the wagon turned the corner and was gone into the darkness. We never saw them again. The house has been empty ever since. No one has dared to even go inside. The Whitfield family vanished. The county records show no sale of their property. No letters arrived for them. No word of their destination ever filtered back to the town. The official record is silent. It is as if, on that night, the wagon carrying Henry, Martha, and the thing that wore their daughter's face rolled right off the edge of the known world. The exodus of the Whitfield family was an amputation. Milledgeville had excised the perceived source of its sickness, and a scar of fearful silence formed over the wound. The house on Oak Street stood empty, a monument to the town's terror. Children who walked past it would cross to the other side of the street. For a time, it was said that at night you could see a single lamp burning in an upstairs window, though no one ever dared to get close enough to be certain. The official record is, as is often the case, mundane in its conclusions. The property records for Baldwin County show that Henry Whitfield ceased paying taxes on his home and business holdings in the winter of 1857. After the legally required period, the properties were seized by the county and sold at public auction in 1860. The house was purchased by a speculator from Savannah, who never lived in it, and it eventually fell into disrepair before being torn down after the war. The official trail of the Whitfield family ends there. A family of three, with a horse and wagon and a few trunks, simply ceased to exist. For years, that was the entirety of the story. They had gone north to live with distant kin in Pennsylvania. That was the story Henry Whitfield had told the sheriff. The one the town chose to believe because it was the neatest, simplest ending. It allowed them to forget. The search for a truer story did not begin until nearly a decade later. It was initiated not by a historian or a lawman, but by a young man named Arthur Croft, the nephew of Martha Whitfield. Having returned from the war, he felt a familial duty to discover the fate of his lost aunt. He began by writing letters to the very relatives in Pennsylvania with whom the Whitfields were supposed to have found refuge. The replies he received were uniform in their confusion. One such reply, from a cousin of Martha's named Samuel Morrison, is preserved among Arthur's papers. A letter to Arthur Croft from Samuel Morrison, dated May 20th, 1866. Dear Arthur, I was saddened to receive your letter and learn of the terrible uncertainty surrounding your Aunt Martha. I fear I can offer no comfort. We have had no word from the Whitfield family since a Christmas card in '56. We certainly never expected their arrival here, and they never came. I had heard a terrible rumor years ago, something about their daughter Clara and a sickness, but the war made such news seem distant and unreliable. To know that they vanished entirely is a shock. I pray that they found peace, but I fear your search will be a difficult one. They are not here, and they have never been. Faced with this dead end, Arthur Croft proved to be a dogged investigator. He reasoned that a family fleeing in shame and fear would not travel toward a welcoming home they had already announced as their destination. They would seek anonymity. They would seek isolation. He began a meticulous search of Henry Whitfield's financial history, poring over old bank ledgers and deeds. It was there, in the dusty archives of a Milledgeville bank, that he found a minor, forgotten transaction from years earlier. Henry had inherited a small, worthless tract of land from his estranged father. It was 50 acres of pine barren and swampland in the remote, sparsely populated county of Clinch, down near the Florida line. It was a place one went to disappear. In the autumn of 1866, Arthur Croft traveled south. His private journal from this trip describes a landscape that was both desolate and hostile. From the Travel Journal of Arthur Croft, October 18, 1866, "The land grows wilder with every mile. The roads are little more than sand tracks through an endless forest of pine and saw palmetto. The air is heavy and smells of resin and decay. The people here are wary of strangers. They speak of panthers in the swamps and of fevers that can take a man in a single night. This is a place at the edge of the world. It is difficult to imagine my gentle Aunt Martha living in such a harsh and unforgiving wilderness. Yet the more I see of it, the more I understand why a man seeking to hide his family would come here. In this place, a secret could be buried forever." After 2 days of searching and asking questions of taciturn locals, he found it. A rutted, overgrown track led him to a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, crudely built from rough-hewn pine logs. The roof had partially collapsed. A rusted axe head was still embedded in a chopping block. The place was utterly abandoned, reclaimed by the relentless encroachment of the wilderness. A profound and terrible silence hung over the clearing. With a growing sense of dread, Arthur pushed open the rotting cabin door. Inside, the scene was one of hasty departure and slow decay. A few pieces of simple furniture lay overturned. Rags of old clothing were scattered on the floor, moldering into the dirt. But it was on a small, crude table in the corner that he found what he was looking for. Protected from the worst of the elements by the last intact section of the roof, lay a small, cloth-bound book. It was Martha Whitfield's diary. The binding was warped by damp, and many of the pages were fused together or eaten by insects. But some fragments were still legible. They were the last record of the Whitfield family, a testament to their final, horrifying months. A legible fragment from an entry dated November 1857 reached the cabin. "It is a wretched place, but it is safe from prying eyes. Henry works from sunup to sundown, trying to make it habitable. I try to keep a home, but my heart is a stone." Clara is unchanged. She sat in the wagon for 3 days and did not speak or move. She does not feel the cold. Last night I found her standing outside in the moonlight, her face tilted up to the sky. She stood like a statue for hours. She is not my daughter. She is a vessel for some other patient thing. Another fragment, from what appears to be late December of that year. "Henry's spirit is breaking. He weeps at night when he thinks I am asleep. There is no joy in this house. Christmas came and went. I tried to sing a carol for her, the one she always loved. She looked at me with those empty eyes, and the song died in my throat. She has begun to wander. She walks into the pine woods for hours. She always comes back just before dusk. She brings things with her now, smooth gray stones from the creek bed, a bird's skull, a handful of black soil. She arranges them in patterns on the floor of her small room. I am afraid to go in there." The final and most coherent entry Arthur could decipher was written in a hand that was barely recognizable, a testament to a mind at the absolute edge of sanity. A fragment believed to be from January 1858. "She does not sleep. I have watched her. All night she sits on her cot, perfectly still, staring at the door. Sometimes the whispering starts, that grinding, clicking sound from her throat. It is a language of the deep earth, of the tomb. Henry tried to talk to her yesterday, to call her name. He touched her arm. She turned to him, and the look on her face, it was not anger, it was not hatred. It was a cold and ancient contempt, the look a predator gives to a thing it no longer fears. Henry pulled his hand back and would not speak for the rest of the day. He has started sleeping with the axe beside his bed. He is not afraid of what might come from the woods. He is afraid of what is in the next room. The diary ended there. The remaining pages were a ruin of water stains and mildew. But Arthur Croft found one last document tucked into the back of the book. It was a single, folded sheet of paper, an unsent letter from Henry Whitfield to his brother, Daniel. It was written in a frantic, desperate scrawl, a final cry from a man trapped in an impossible nightmare. An unsent letter from Henry Whitfield. Brother, if you are reading this, then I have failed. Martha is gone. Not dead, I think, but her mind has fled. She no longer speaks. She just rocks in her chair and hums a tuneless dirge. The thing that calls itself Clara has broken her. It does not eat. It does not sleep. It only watches. It watches us with an intelligence that chills my soul. It is not our child. It is a husk animated by something that should not know the sun. It has the patience of stone. It is waiting for something. I can feel it. It is growing stronger in this isolation. I cannot kill it. God forgive me, I cannot bring myself to strike the face of my daughter. But I cannot live like this. I have one last idea, a desperate one. I will take it back. I will take it back to the place it came from, the grave it clawed its way out of. Perhaps the earth will reclaim its own. Tonight, I will tell Martha we are going home. I will put it in the wagon. We will go back to Milledgeville. It is a fool's errand, a madman's pilgrimage, but it is the only hope I have left. Pray for my soul. Henry. That was the last piece of the puzzle. Arthur Croft found no other clues in the abandoned cabin. There were no graves nearby, no signs of violence. The family, or what was left of it, had simply vanished from this place as well. The trail that had begun in a house on Oak Street ended here, in a rotting cabin in the middle of a vast, indifferent wilderness, with the insane plan of a broken man. But history is composed of more than official records and private letters. It is also made of whispers. While Henry Whitfield's intended journey back to Milledgeville seems impossible, a strange new thread of folklore began to spin in the town around that same time. People in the spring of 1858 began to speak of seeing a figure in Memory Hill Cemetery late at night. A young girl, pale and barefoot, wandering among the tombstones, her white dress looking like a burial shroud in the moonlight. Most dismissed it as a ghost story, a grim fable born from the town's shared trauma. But the sightings persisted, a quiet, unsettling rumor that refused to die. The official record was silent. The family was gone. But something, it seemed, had come back. The disappearance of the Whitfield family created a vacuum, and into that vacuum flowed rumor, folklore, and a persistent, low-grade dread. The unwritten record of Milledgeville, the one passed down in hushed conversations on front porches and around dimly lit tavern tables, held a different truth than the county ledgers. In this version of the story, Clara Whitfield never truly left. The first documented mention of a lingering presence comes not from a terrified citizen, but from a surprisingly sober source. Jacob Early, the old cemetery groundskeeper who had first discovered the empty grave, was a man of few words and no imagination. He dealt in the practical realities of death, digging graves, cutting grass, and keeping the wrought iron fence in good repair. In the spring of 1858, roughly 5 months after the Whitfields' departure, he began making notes in the margins of his work ledger. These were not official reports, but private observations. From the work ledger of Jacob Early, entry dated March 12, 1858. New grave for the child, Eleanor Sims. Ground is soft from the rains. Noticed something strange near the Whitfield plot. Small stones arranged in a circle. Did not see them yesterday. Cleared them away. A week later, another entry appeared. From the work ledger of Jacob Early, entry dated March 19, 1858. The stones are back. Same place, a perfect circle. This time with a dead bird in the center. A sparrow, neck is broken, no sign of a cat. Just laid there, neat as you please. This is mischief. Boys from the town, likely. But the incidents grew stranger. more difficult to explain as youthful vandalism. Jacob Early's simple notes document a slow, creeping pattern of unnatural order appearing in the place of final rest. From the work ledger of Jacob Early, entry dated April 5, 1858. All the flowers from the Miller family plot are gone. Found them laid out in a straight line, from the old oak tree to the Whitfield headstone. Laid petal to stem, 100 feet long at least. Took me an hour to clean it up. The gates were locked all night. I have the only key. These small desecrations were unsettling, but they were contained within the cemetery walls. Then, the strangeness began to bleed back into the town itself, echoing the events of the previous autumn. A farmer on the edge of town reported finding one of his sheep dead, its fleece inexplicably woven with strands of long blonde hair. A woman who lived near the cemetery swore she heard a soft, clicking whisper outside her window late one night, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. Most chillingly, children began to speak of the Stone Girl. It started as a playground dare to run to the cemetery gate after dusk. Several children who did so came back pale and shaken, speaking of seeing a girl with white hair sitting on a tombstone, arranging pebbles in her lap. They said she never looked up, never made a sound, but the sight of her was enough to send them running. These stories were dismissed by most adults as morbid fantasies, the product of overactive imaginations steeped in the town's recent trauma. But the persistence of the tale began to worry Reverend Pruitt. He had believed the town's evil had been expelled, but these new stories suggested the root had not been fully pulled. A letter from Pruitt to a colleague in Savannah shows his renewed concern. He was a man who took the whispers of children as seriously as the confessions of adults, believing both could be conduits for dark truths. An excerpt from the correspondence of Reverend Josiah Pruitt, dated May 30, 1858. A new infection of fear has taken hold, centered on the cemetery. Children speak of a spectral girl, an apparition they have named the Stone Girl. The description, a pale child with fair hair, is troublingly familiar. While I am inclined to dismiss this as childish fancy, the sheer consistency of the accounts gives me pause. It is as if the memory of the Whitfield abomination has taken root in the soil of that unhallowed ground and is now sprouting these foul blossoms of rumor. I have begun walking the cemetery grounds myself in the evenings, with prayer and vigilance as my companions. I have seen nothing, but I feel a watchfulness in that place that is not of God. The unwritten record gained its most significant and terrifying chapter in the summer of that same year. A family new to Milledgeville, the Carvers, had moved into a small house that bordered the southern wall of Memory Hill Cemetery. They were unaware of the town's recent history and knew nothing of the Whitfield affair. They were a simple, hard-working family with a single daughter named Alice, who was 7 years old. Alice Carver was a quiet, solitary child. She was often seen playing alone in the tall grass at the edge of her family's property, which ran right up to the low stone wall of the cemetery. Her parents saw no harm in it. In late July, Alice's mother noticed a change in her daughter's play. Alice had begun collecting small, smooth stones and bringing them into the house. She would spend hours arranging them into complex, spiral patterns on the floor of her room. The deposition of Mrs. Margaret Carver, taken later by a deeply troubled Sheriff Thompson, is a harrowing account of a mother watching her child slowly slip away. Deposition of Margaret Carver, Baldwin County, August 14, 1858. It started with the stones. At first, I thought it was just a child's game, but the patterns she made, they were strange, not like anything a child would build. They made me feel cold just looking at them. Then she started talking about her new friend. She said her friend's name was Clara. She said Clara lived on the other side of the wall and that she was teaching her a new language. A quiet language, she called it. A language of stones. I told her it was just make-believe, but Alice insisted she was real. She said Clara had hair like corn silk and her hands were always cold, even in the sun. Mrs. Carver grew more concerned when Alice began to exhibit other strange behaviors. She developed a habit of standing perfectly still for long periods, staring at nothing. She lost her appetite. And one evening, her mother found her standing by the back door, whispering, "Deposition of Margaret Carver, continued." It was that whispering that truly frightened me. It was not her own voice. It was a low, guttural sound, full of clicks and hisses, the same sounds she said Clara was teaching her. When I asked her what she was saying, she just looked at me with this terribly blank expression and said, "I was just telling the dark that I'm not afraid of it anymore." I did not know what to do. My husband said it was just nightmares, but I knew it was more than that. Something was wrong with my little girl. Something from over that wall had gotten into her. The climax of the Carver family's ordeal occurred on the night of August 12th. A violent thunderstorm rolled over Milledgeville, the sky alive with lightning, and the sound of thunder like cannon fire. In the middle of the storm, Margaret Carver awoke with a start, realizing Alice was not in her bed. A frantic search of the house found her gone. The back door was unlatched, swinging in the wind. What followed was a desperate search in the pouring rain. Mr. Carver and two neighbors carrying lanterns scoured the property and the nearby woods. They found nothing. It was Margaret Carver who, guided by a mother's intuition, went to the cemetery wall. In a brilliant flash of lightning, she saw it. A small section of the old stone wall had been recently disturbed. Several large stones had been pulled away, creating a small opening just large enough for a child to crawl through. A small, private search party, led by Sheriff Thompson and a reluctant Reverend Pruitt, entered the cemetery in the dead of night. For over an hour, they searched among the rain-lashed tombstones, their lantern light casting long, dancing shadows. They found Alice Carver near the center of the cemetery, not far from the plot marked with the name Whitfield. Sheriff Thompson's final report on the incident is written in a hand that is noticeably less steady than his usual official script. Official report, Sheriff Brody. Thompson, August 13, 1858. At approximately 2 in the morning, the missing child, Alice Carver, was located within the grounds of Memory Hill Cemetery. She was found standing before an open grave. The grave was that of Clara Whitfield, who was buried in September of the previous year. The earth had been excavated by hand, the soil piled neatly to one side. The pine coffin was exposed, its lid splintered and broken open. The child, Alice, was standing ankle-deep in the muddy hole, looking down into the empty coffin. She was unresponsive to our calls. She was holding a single, smooth, gray stone in each hand. When I lifted her from the grave, she did not resist. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch. We returned her to her parents. A subsequent examination of the gravesite confirmed that the coffin was empty, save for some rotted scraps of a white dress. There were no signs of the body of Clara Whitfield. The grave had been opened, it appeared, from the inside. Again, the Carver family left Milledgeville within a week. The story of what happened to their daughter and what she was doing in that open grave became the final, horrifying entry in the town's unwritten record. The grave of Clara Whitfield was filled in the next day by a silent and trembling Jacob Early. No stone was placed to mark it this time. The town wanted to forget the name, to let the grass grow over the spot and erase it from memory. But the unwritten record held that the grave was not empty because someone had taken the body. It was empty because its occupant had no more need of it. It had found a new vessel, or perhaps it was simply waiting, patient as stone, for the next lonely child who was willing to listen to the whispers from the other side of the wall. The official history of Milledgeville has no room for the story of Clara Whitfield. It is a footnote at best, a tragic but unremarkable case of a misdiagnosed fever, followed by a period of local unrest attributed to the grief and superstition of a bygone era. Memory Hill Cemetery is now a lost place, enclosed by a rusted chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The city lists the property as abandoned, structurally unsafe due to collapsing tombs and uneven ground. It is not a park. It is not a memorial. It is a place that has been deliberately and successfully forgotten. The account you have just heard is a reconstruction, a mosaic pieced together from the fragments left behind in the silent archives. It is built from brittle letters, the faded ink of private journals, and the cold, spare entries in county ledgers. There are vast gaps in the narrative, silences where the truth was either too terrible to write down or has been lost to time. What became of Henry and Martha Whitfield on their mad pilgrimage back to a town that had cast them out? The record does not say. What became of Alice Carver, the child who was found whispering to an empty coffin? The record does not say. They are loose threads, snipped from the tapestry of history. The story should end there. A strange and terrible local tragedy, sealed in the past, an artifact of a more credulous time. Last spring, I traveled to Milledgeville to see the final piece of the record for myself, the abandoned ground. It is as the city records describe. The fence is formidable, the gates padlocked and draped in chains. Kudzu and wild grapevines have swallowed whole monuments, creating monstrous green shapes where angels and obelisks once stood. The air inside that fence feels thick, still, and watchful. I found a place where the fence had been pulled back at the bottom, likely by animals or curious teenagers. I slipped through and walked the grounds for over an hour, guided by a crumbling 19th century plat map. The old oak tree mentioned in so many of the accounts still stands, a gnarled and ancient giant. Near its roots, I tried to find the place where the Whitfield plot would have been. There is nothing there now. No stone, no mound, no sign that the earth was ever disturbed at all. It is just a patch of weeds and tangled grass, indistinguishable from any other. I was about to leave, convinced that the story had finally found its quiet, unremarkable end. But as I turned, a glint of gray against the dark soil caught my eye. It was not in the Whitfield plot, but a few yards away, partially obscured by a low-growing vine. I knelt down and pulled the leaves away. It was a spiral, a small, perfect spiral laid out on the bare earth. It was made of smooth, gray stones, the kind one might find in a creek bed. They were clean, free of the moss and grime that covered everything else in that place. They did not look like they had been there for 100 years. They looked as if they had been placed there that morning. The story is not over. The history is not finished. The silence that fell over Milledgeville in 1858 was not the silence of an ending. It was the silence of a patient thing returning to its work, a language of stone and soil being spoken without the need for a human voice. The unwritten record is still being written, one stone at a time, in a forgotten place, waiting for someone new to come along and learn how to read it.